Welcome back to another episode of Dugout Talk. Apologize, obviously, for kind of the unforeseen event of yesterday. We're right back at it today. Things are back on track and looking good. So today is Tuesday, March 16th, 2021. Today is episode 39 of Dugout Talk, and we're going to be covering the 2021 rule changes for Major League Baseball and Minor League Baseball. We'll get things started off here with a little baseball history. So for me, I thought this was crazy to think that for the very first time in 2015, we had two current Hall of Fame players actually manage against each other. This was Ryan Sandberg, who was with the Phillies at the time, and Paul Molitor, who was with the Twins. Both of them were managers. Molitor was enshrined in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame in 2004. Ryan Sandberg was inducted a year later. So they got to manage against each other in a grapefruit league game back in 2015.
So like, was this the first time it had ever happened, or was this
Yeah,
like, wow,
yep, the first time that two managers who were Hall of Fame players managed against each other.
huh? That is really interesting that it took that long for that to
Yeah.
happen, and the fact that it wasn't in a regular season game that
Mm.
was the case. So my day in history happened 54 years ago in 1967 in one of the highest scoring spring training games ever. The Boston Red Sox tallied 10 earned runs in the ninth inning to upend the New York Mets 23 to 18. Boston outhit the Mets 23 to 17, and Jim Longborg is the eventual winner over Jack Hamilton. The Boston Globe said the only man who looked like a pitcher was Darrell Brandon. Um, I think it speaks for itself. 23 to 18. That's doesn't get much more crazier than that, especially in a spring game when you've got people competing for roster spots. So yeah, the love of spring training, right?
Yeah. Anything can happen in spring training. Anything can happen. Yep. All right. So, as previously mentioned, we'll be covering some of the rules, some of the updated rules, some of the changed rules for 2021. Looking at some of the notable rule changes in 2020, we had 7 inning doubleheaders. So, if you had a doubleheader, you played 7 innings instead of nine. We had a league-wide designated hitter. So the National League, for the very first time ever, had a DH all year long. We had a 16-team expanded postseason. We had a three-batter minimum for pitchers. This was implemented in 2019, unless they ended an inning, which then voided the three-batter requirement. And then after 9 innings, each half inning would start with a runner on second base. And then obviously, because of the COVID-19 implications, players and managers are required to keep physical distance from umpires, opponents, and opposing managers on the field of play. And those who came within 6 feet of umpires, opponents, or managers for the purpose of argument were subject to immediate ejection and discipline, including a fine and suspension. So, looking at some of the 2020 rule changes, like on the surface, you would think to yourself, these aren't necessary rule changes, but none of them really had a big impact on the season.
Yeah, I mean, kind of when you look at what the season was like last year, when you're going to implement changes, I guess last year was the year to kind of do this thing. 7 inning double headers, the league wide DH. And again, these weren't terrible rules by any means. I think, sure, some of these, when you saw it actually unfold, are definitely like, now you can actually say whether you hate it or love it. Um, but again, I feel like last year was the year to do this kind of thing. If there was going to be a season for it, in a 60-game season, you might as well experiment with whatever you possibly can.
Yeah. Looking at some of the notable 2021 minor league rule changes, a lot of crazy rule changes are going to be coming into the minor leagues. Obviously, it goes without mentioning that the minor leagues are completely revamped, completely redefined, a lot fewer minor league teams in general, and the minor league system has been kind of we will have slightly larger bases with a less slippery surface in the minor leagues. This is going from 15 inches up to 18 inches. That's the width of each bag. This is across all triple league levels. If you look at, if you think about how some of these plays at first and second go down, I think it's very possible that we may see some guys beat. We should see a lot more infield hits get beat out. 3 inches makes up a lot. So I guess,
Mhm.
technically, if you look at how the base is going to be set up, are they actually still going to be 90 feet? Or is it going to be like 1 inch this way or 3 inches this way? Or is it going to be 3 inches this way? Or is it going to be kind of each way? Because if it is kind of each way, that I guess it's no longer technically like 90 feet. It's kind of
Right.
going to be like 87 inches. Um,
Hmm.
but Yeah, so that's the first one. I know I got the math wrong. I was just doing that in my head. A requirement that all four infielders have their cleats within the outer boundary of the infield dirt when a pitch is delivered. That's across all of Double A. So basically, that's kind of their take on how to curb the infield shift that's been plaguing baseball, depending on who you ask in recent years. This isn't going to I know some people would prefer, two infielders on each side of second base, and that's it. But this is probably the next best thing. So you can't have, you could still throw, your shortstop over there in between first and second baseman. They just can't stand, 30 feet into the outfield grass like they usually do. So if you still hit, Giancarlo Stanton 120-mile-per-hour line drive just off the grass, it's gonna find its way through a lot more often than what it used to. That I'm okay with. Next up, we have a requirement that pitchers must step off the rubber to attempt a pickoff, and that's across all of the high A leagues. That one I'm not so sure about. I'm not sure what's really. I don't know what the backstory is about it. I'm not really sure why they feel it's one that they need to implement. I don't really see where pace of play comes involved with that. Um, there's going to be a limit of 2 pickoff attempts per plate appearance. That's across all the low A leagues. That one I'm not too crazy about. I feel like if you're gonna, I mean, most plate appearances are 4 or 5 pitches. So if you're gonna throw over twice, I think that's more than plenty. We'll have a 15-second pitch clock, and that's in low A West only. I believe that's a little quicker than what it usually is. I think it's usually closer to 20 seconds.
Hmm.
And then you have an automatic ball strike system in low A Southeast only. That one is going to be very interesting to keep an eye on. What are your thoughts about some of these rule changes in the minor leagues? Uh,
Well, um, I guess to put it bluntly, these are stupid. They don't really make a ton of sense to me. The slightly larger base thing, I'm not really sure what the science is behind it. Apparently, it's safer to have a
mhm.
bigger bag, um, which I guess I can see that if you're trying to prevent collisions. I'm not really sure what that's about though. So I guess I don't care that much about that. That sounds like something that's going to be implemented across baseball, in not too long of time. Um, the infield shift thing though, of these rules, this is really the only one I don't have a problem with. And I kind of asked people in our group chat the other day how we actually feel about the shift, and I think
Mhm.
uh, I don't really know why people still do it. I think it's one of those cases where people are too, like, managers today are too analytically driven, and they're really overdoing it up to this point where they're just kind of they're it's almost like they're telling a hitter, you have to beat us in a different way, which I guess in a way it goes to it makes it so that the hitter has to learn to adjust. But there's no reason a third baseman should be playing on the right side of the infield, or a shortstop should be playing on the right side of the infield. That's not where they belong. There's no reason that there should be four guys in an outfield. This isn't softball where they have that random rover player who can kind of go in
Mhm.
any outfield position. No, you have three outfielders for a reason. Um, I think, and to be honest, I've seen the shift burn teams more than actually help. I think if you watch enough baseball games, you can probably say the same thing, that eventually, if you keep shifting, if a team is good enough, if a hitter is good enough, they are going to adjust. And then what do you do at that point? Are you going to keep shifting against them, or are you going to actually just play them regularly? Um, so I'm okay with this rule. I think that the league does need to do something about extreme shifting. Now, granted, if you're, I think I notice that sometimes with outfield, you might see a team put their center fielder more like in right field or in left field, depending on like if the head batter tends to hit more to one side of the field, which that to me isn't even that bad. Most people don't even notice it. You might look at it and say he seems a little like the center fielder seems a little closer to right, but that's not a noticeable from the naked eye kind of thing. But when you have a third baseman who is literally playing just behind second base, he's not even in his rightful position, and that's not okay. He should be manning his corner at third. Just keep him there. Um, the pitcher rule with stepping off the rubber. Um, I don't know. Is that going to be a balk now or something if they just do that automatic pickoff? Because I know lefties there's a lot of lefties who have that move where they'll make a slight step towards home and then they'll fire to first right away. Is that going to be a balk now? Like, is that not going to be a thing? Because I know a few years ago they took away the pickoff to third attempt, which that's now a balk. If it's even an attempt, that's a balk. Um, so I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like that one's kind of pointless because there's no, I don't know. I feel like you're just taking away a pitcher's pickoff move at that point. Um, which I don't know. Maybe stepping off the rubber is something that pitchers have to do already. I'm not really familiar with pitching myself, so maybe that's something that they have to do, and the league is just trying to be more strict about it. I don't know what that's about. The limit of 2 pickoff attempts per plate appearance. Now that one's going to backfire so bad. And you know it's going to backfire because all a runner has to do is dive back to the bag twice. They can have the smallest leadoff of first base, second base, whatever base they're on. They can have the smallest leadoff, and once a pitcher attempts a throw twice, they can basically just walk to the next base because they know that the pitcher's not going to throw back there. Like, I don't know how
Mm-hmm.
pitchers can be okay with this. I don't know how the league can be okay with a limit of 2 pickoff attempts. Now, granted, I'll admit it does get a little annoying when a pitcher is focused more on the runner on base than they are at the batter. I get it. That can be a little, after about 3 or 4, it's kind of like, all right, dude, just throw it to the batter. Just if you're probably not gonna get him. But that's also what makes the game a thing of beauty is there's no limit on how many times a pitcher can do that. If they want to throw to the base, let them throw to the base. Um, 2, I don't know. I think 2 seems a little too generous for the base runner. If the limit
Mm-hmm.
was more like 5, okay, sure. Or maybe if they had a limit where um, the pitcher couldn't throw like more than 3 consecutive pickoff throws or something like that. I guess maybe I could get behind that. But even then, the pitcher can do whatever he wants. Don't put a limit on how many times he can pick off or make a pickoff throw. Because, like I said, all he has to do is make 2. And once he makes the second one, the base runner knows he can get the biggest lead of his life. It's going to be the catcher who's going to have to throw down there. And actually, I don't know if that would be considered a pickoff throw. That's a question I have is if the catcher makes a throw down to first base, is that considered a pickoff throw or to third base or to second base? So I guess I would want some more clarity on that because again, this very much favors the base runners. It seems like more Manfred is trying to generate offense, and this is like one of the best ways to do it. Um, 15-second pitch clock. I think my opinion on the pitch clock. I think it's stupid. It's never been needed. No one ever took advantage of the pitch clock of like taking too long on warmups before the pitch clock. So why did we need it? Umpires always knew when to get a pitcher to get going. Why do you need a pitch clock? That makes no sense to me. Automatic ball strike system. There is yet to be a system that is really flawless. So unless if they found something and they're trying it down in the low minor leagues, I say scrap it. The automatic ball strike system, even if they do implement this in the league, there's still going to be people out there who are going to complain about it. It's not going to matter. Um, I think more people are in favor of the human element of the game with umpires actually making those calls instead of having a machine do it. I remember, I think it was Arizona Fall League not too long ago tried to implement the automatic ball strike system, and it was a complete mess, um, because there were just way too many delays in calls because an umpire, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but an umpire will wear an earpiece. They'll have an earpiece on, and pretty much the calls are coming from the press box, from what I understand with this system. The calls come from the press box. It gets made in the umpire's earpiece, and whatever that system says, the umpire has to call it. Which I think, I don't know. That seems like you're just taking away the human element of the job when you're doing that. Now, granted, this isn't going to eliminate umpires because someone still has to be controlling the machine. They have to
Hmm.
they're going to have to hold the machine however they do it. But
Yep.
um, I just don't. I don't get it. I think that's the only rule that I really am okay with is the shift rule. But even then, the outer boundary, infielders should be allowed to at least go a little bit into the outfield. I don't think that's a problem. Like if a shortstop or second baseman are playing in like the very shallow ends of the outfield, as long as they're not in like medium depth in the outfield, I don't think that it's a problem if they're sitting out there. They just can't be moving to other positions to favor where a batter might hit the ball, you know?
I think what my biggest thing with a lot of those rules is a lot of them like before some of these rules got implemented, a lot of what baseball was about helping the pitcher. A lot
Hmm.
of these rules, hitters had to, there's no more stepping out of the box, readjusting your gloves, grabbing some dirt, rubbing some pine tar on your gloves and your bat. None of that stuff could happen. And all the infield shifts were so great. I feel like everything was kind of helping pitchers. Um, just to give my thoughts on it. Not a fan of the pitch clock. There aren't too many guys who take a long time. I know Pedro Baez is probably the biggest criminal in terms of that. He does, I think he takes like almost 40 seconds. I think it was in the
Ooh.
postseason in between pitches. I might be off. It might be something like 30, but he takes a long time in between pitches. Um, so the pitch clock, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to put a clock on baseball, on any aspect of baseball besides the in between half innings. Um, the automatic ball strike system, unless it's going to be 100% correct on every ball strike call forever, I don't want it. If
Hmm.
it's not going to be 100.1% accurate, this thing has to be absolutely flawless, perfect, no time delays, no nothing. This thing has to be 100% perfect. That's the only way I would take it.
Exactly.
Um, the two pickoff attempts per plate appearance, I'm generally okay with it because stolen bases have absolutely died in recent years, and I
Hmm.
think that in order for a base runner to warrant a pickoff, they have to get that big lead in the first place. And
Yeah.
if a runner gets that big lead in the first place and the pitcher decides to go to home plate because he doesn't want to waste a pickoff throw, that runner might go because he's already got a good lead.
Right.
I think that kind of making pitchers think a little more about when and where and how, and making base runners think a little more about when, where, and how. I think that could be potentially good with the pickoff. The rubber attempt and pickoff. I don't know enough about how major league pitchers have to go about picking off, so I won't go too far on that. But with the shift, I do really like. I do like this is a good beginning for
Mm.
getting rid of the shift. I think at least keeping the infielders on the infield grass, I think, is a good start. I don't know. I don't know why they decided to go with this instead of just two players on each side of the bag. If you
Yeah.
really wanted to, you could just put your shortstop like just to the shortstop side of second base, and then it's almost technically a shift in the first place.
Hmm.
I know a lot of teams, that was kind of like something teams used to do before the shift became known as a shift. But yeah, I in general, I'm not I'm not quite as I'm not quite as harsh on most of these, but there are some that if they're not going to work right in the very first time, I don't want them.
One last note I want to make about the ball strike system. In order for it to be flawless, the pitch is gonna have to be measured as it's entering home plate, not where the catcher
Hmm.
catches it, because
Correct.
it actually doesn't matter where the catcher catches the ball. If
Doesn't.
that
Yeah.
ball enters the plate at the knees, but then has sinking motion,
Hmm.
granted, umpires probably won't call it a strike a lot of times because when there's that much movement and a ball moving that fast, they don't
Yep.
see it with the naked
Yep.
eye. But that's technically a strike.
Hmm.
So that's why the system has to be flawless. It's got to actually call the pitch as it's entering the zone versus where the catcher catches it. And people aren't
Yes.
going to like that. I can promise you that much.
Yeah. Yeah. And it would really almost eliminate the whole pitch framing
Hmm.
fad that people have these days.
Exactly.
Um, Looking at some of the notable 2021 Major League rule changes, these are rule changes that you will see implement. Well, I mean, not necessarily changes. Some of these are just brought over from last year, but you will see all of these implemented into Major League Baseball this season. Doubleheaders will still remain 2 7 inning games. That one I don't have much of an issue with. We'll talk about the pros and cons with some of these later on. So during extra innings, so after you've played 9 full innings, each offense will get a runner on second base to start every half inning. So the top of the 10th, the bottom of the 10th, and so on until the game is over. The hitting team will have a runner start on second base. Looking at the pitchers, they must still face 3 hitters before they can be removed unless they end an inning. So if you come in, you face one guy, that's the end of an inning. Then you don't have to come out to start the next half or to start the next inning. Active roster limits will revert back to 26 and expand to 28 in September. I know they were a little large at some points last year to help with potential COVID cases. Um, Looking at major league clubs, they're permitted to carry up to 5 taxi squad players on all road trips. I like that one. Looking at the universal DH, it has been shelved for now. I do have some information I want to show you guys later on. And then looking at MLB postseason, it has been reverted back to its normal 10 teams, which is I would say a plus over the expanded playoffs they had last season.
Yeah, so actually, kind of like what I said at the beginning with how 2020 was the year to experiment with some of these to actually decide if you loved it or hate it. I can get behind the double headers thing for 2021 as well. I don't think this should be a long-term thing, but I am okay with it this year again. And I brought up a point not too long ago about how when you have a double header, you usually start game one like high noon, somewhere around there. Game two starts around 4 or 5 when like the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the league is playing their games.
Yep.
You don't want game one going 6 hours. You just
Mm-hmm.
don't, because
Yep.
game two is going to go into the night. Um, so I think having 7 inning doubleheaders is not the worst thing in the world. I can get behind it. I'm not for it long term, but if it's just a thing this year and it goes away again, I'm totally okay with it. I actually liked it last year. I thought it helped get all the games in that needed to get played whenever they needed to do them. So it's not the worst thing for me. I think this is definitely something I can get behind for 2021. The offensive rule with the runners on second base, though, to start every half inning is complete BS. Um, this is just awful. I have no positive things to say about this, and I saw it last year. So I was like, even when it was just a thought, it wasn't a thing in Major League Baseball. I was like, this is dumb. When I saw it last year, I was like, this is really dumb. And now that it's going to be seen again this year, I'm thinking Manfred just wants to ruin the game of baseball because these are what his buddies on Park Avenue want, not necessarily what fans want. Um, and I don't like to bash Manfred, believe me, I don't. But he kind of does it to himself when he makes rules like this. This is not traditional baseball. I get it. Playing games past the 15th inning, like yeah, those games suck. Especially they suck for fans, they suck for the players. They're not fun all the time. But here's the thing, they don't happen all the time. You might see a 15 inning game maybe once a week. Maybe. I mean, granted,
Mm.
sometimes you
Yeah.
might see more. You might. But when do you ever see a game go 16, 17? You don't see that very often. That's not a common thing. 15 is a little more common, but usually after that, you're kind of getting into history at that
Mm-hmm.
point. Um, and the runner on second thing, that gives an advantage to the away team by a long shot. Like the away team has a bigger advantage because all they have to do, especially if you're a team like the Dodgers, all you have to do is just get that runner home on a leadoff single. You're ahead, and then your bullpen
Mhm.
just lights it out the rest of the way. Um, to me, it's not fair to the pitchers either. I know you were saying how the game seemed to be favoring pitchers for a long time. It's not fair to the pitchers to do something like this either. Um, so I'm really not for it. Pitchers must face three hitters. That one I am absolutely for because having four pitching changes in the span of six batters is dreadful. That is
Brutal.
not fun to sit through as a fan. So I am perfectly on board with the three batter minimum. Um,
Mhm.
the active roster limit, I guess 26 is okay, but I feel like if they're going to allow five additional taxi squad players, why not just expand the rosters to 30? Why not just do that for this year?
Yeah.
What's the point of having taxi squad players who aren't going to be playing minor league ball? They're just going to be sitting on the bench, not on the active roster, just kind of having to get reps in by not seeing live action. And then if they do somehow get live action, they're not really getting that time. They're not getting the time and they need to prepare. To prepare the way players need to actually prepare. So why not just expand the roster to 30 this year if you're going to do that? I think just in general, the active roster should be bigger to begin with. I think it should be 28 players, but I'll talk about that maybe in a later episode. Um, the universal DH, I'm indifferent on it. I don't really care. I think I'd rather see either do a universal DH or all pitchers hit, do one or the other. This whole business of the American League does the DH and the National League pitchers hit is it's aged out. I feel like it's not really something that should be a thing anymore. I think the league just needs to decide: are we going to have pitchers hit, or are we going to do universal DH? Go one way or the other. And I like the 10 teams back to the postseason. I think 10's a good number over 16.
Mhm.
You get 33% of the team of the league. Makes the wild card race a lot more interesting too. Um, I know division races seem to really get decided early on in the year now, but the wild card always is it's a fascinating thing. I just wish that the wild card game was not a one game, a do or die game. I
Yeah.
wish it was more of a series like they did last season. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, that's pretty much my spiel on this. I didn't mean to go on a rant like I
Oh no,
did,
you're good.
but but
Looking at, we'll start off looking at the seven inning double headers. Just listing some pros and cons. So obviously, some pros of the seven inning double headers. Bullpens and pitching staffs in general are spared the severe stress of a typical doubleheader, being they don't. That's four less innings that you have to go. Um, so that's 4 innings. In general, assuming both games go 9 innings, that's four less innings that you have to worry about. Obviously, if a game goes longer, you could be talking about 5, 6, 7. You could be talking about saving a whole game's worth of innings. By having 7 inning double headers. Um, you get more flexibility in terms of start times and finishes. That in turn is going to keep a lot more fans at the ballpark longer. I think if we have a scheduled doubleheader, I think if someone has a ticket to one game, they should be able to go to both.
mm,
I don't know if that's actually how they do things. I know that
sometimes they do.
sometimes rainouts and stuff, they will give people the ability to do that. But I mean, you can start the first game at 1, maybe start the first game at 12. You can start the second game at 4. Both games will be over, right around 2.5, 3 hours, being 7 innings. And so, you can get a lot more fans to the ballpark, especially during the weekdays when people have work the next morning. There's a good chance they may stay until, 8, 9, or 10 just to make sure the game's over rather than having to go home in a normal game because now it's approaching midnight and they got work at 6 in the morning the next day. And obviously there's a bonus to teams with good starting pitching. If you're a team like the Nationals or the Dodgers, you may go 7 innings with both of your starting pitchers and get complete games and save your bullpen 2 games worth of time. And then looking at some of the cons, There is potential for teams to have way fewer innings than opponents. They play a lot of doubleheaders. This occurred last season with the Cardinals, who were absolutely, ravaged with COVID cases multiple times throughout the season. I think they ended up playing like 70 fewer innings than the Dodgers, who led the league in innings played. Um, so there is a potential that if a team has 2 to 3 weeks where they get hit really hard with COVID, they may end up playing a lot of double headers back to back, but they may end up playing less innings than some of their opponents. And then there's just a weird feeling not seeing a major league game go 9 innings. I think that's probably one of the biggest cons to it, is that it's just it's not quite a normal major league game if it doesn't go 9 innings. And then obviously, going this goes without saying that if you're a team that has bad starting pitching, a double header regardless is going to be bad for you.
Hmm.
7 inning doubleheader may not be quite so bad.
Yeah, I think the pros and cons speak for themselves. I mean, it's something that's good for a little bit. Just long term, I
Yeah.
hope this doesn't stick around. But um, yeah,
It's
I
good.
think
It's good for this this COVID world that we live in. Once
yeah,
once I think we reach the post COVID life, I think it is very very possible we go back to a normal doubleheader setup.
absolutely, absolutely.
Looking at some pros and cons of the runner on second base and extra innings. So some of the pros, not nearly as many super long baseball games. That saves a lot of bullpens. It is possible that if you're a team that has good strategy, the runner on second base, assuming he's got any sort of speed, sacrifice bunt gets him over to third. A base hit into the outfield scores him. If he's fast, maybe even an infield hit. Fernando Tatis would probably try that. Um, it keeps casual and fringe fans interested. I know that some of the people who may I know a lot of people who live in the central Pennsylvania area who call themselves Pirate fans but don't watch baseball. If they're going to sit down and watch a game, they really don't want to invest 6 hours into a baseball game. So I think that having a runner on second base and extra innings are already super exciting as it is. So I think the addition of a runner on second base may keep them interested for the duration of the extra innings. And then obviously there's an opportunity for super fast and super smart base runners to find jobs without needing to be good hitters as well. This kind of tacks on with the expanded rosters. Um, if you're Billy Hamilton, I know he's not going to make the Reds team, but a guy like Billy Hamilton is probably going to find a job somewhere just because of how fast he is and how good he is at stealing bases. He's a guy that you could very easily have, as that runner on second base, to start your extra inning, and bring him home. And looking at some of the cons, minor league relief pitchers won't get called up nearly as often because the lack of extra inning games is going to affect and save some of these bullpens. Some of these guys, they may send a bullpen arm down to call a bullpen arm up, and that guy who's going to get called up may not get called up now because the game ended at 10 innings instead of 17. There's also potential for unnatural endings to games. Obviously, runner on second base to start an inning. If there's an error, and the first batter, we saw some crazy endings with the runner on second base last year. And I'd hate for a lot of these box scores this season to be affected by something like that as well, especially being that the runner on second base doesn't count as a earned run for that pitcher. And then not nearly as many position players will be pitching. A shout out to Todd Frazier's knuckleball there. He was talking about it. He doesn't want to pitch again. He says that he's more than happy being tied for the best ERA in baseball history. He got his 1 inning in, but I guess he learned a knuckleball from some coaches way back when. Um, it's kind of fun watching position players pitch, simply because they really just don't, and it's always cool. Like I got to see, not in person but on TV, DJ LeMahieu had just hit a bomb off a position player pitching last year. So it's always a good spectacle to see position players on the mound.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's fun. I mean, I think there are teams out there that kind of abuse it though, just to save their bullpen.
Sure. I mean, if you want to try it, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess, it's your poison. Do what you want with it. But I already gave my spiel on this. I don't think there's really
Yeah.
anything good about it. But the thing about keeping casual or fringe fans interested, I'll just say this: Manfred better be prepared to lose some lifelong fans if he's trying to gain some new fans by making some of these changes. Because I know people who are very much not on board with this, and
Yeah.
you don't want to lose the fan base you already have, especially because
Hmm.
it's just not as popular a sport as it was at one time.
Yeah. Um, Looking at some pros and cons of the three batter minimum for pitchers, some of the pros potentially, or there's potential for slightly faster paced play. Obviously, if a pitcher, you're going to face three batters no matter what, unless you're ending an inning. So, it's not going to be, you got a lefty, a righty, and then a lefty coming up in the lineup. You're going to call in a lefty to face the lefty, call a righty to face the righty, and then a lefty to face the lefty. We won't have that anymore. There will be a premium placed on pitchers who can excel at getting out both left-handed and right-handed hitters. I think those guys are going to start seeing bigger contracts once this really takes place. And we figure out who's going to be if some of these lefty specialists can turn out to be overall good relief pitchers against righties as well. I think some of those guys might get some lucrative contracts entering the next couple seasons. And then obviously hitters won't face nearly as many specialists, resulting in potentially higher averages for them. Some of these veteran lefty sluggers. In recent years, the Ortizes, the Bruces, the Vados, insert left-handed power hitter, Mark Teixeira. These guys won't face nearly as many specialist pitchers, guys who are specifically designed to get a certain type of hitter out, because they will have to face two other guys either before or after that player. So there is potential that some of these guys will face normal relief pitchers rather than absolutely filthy like submarine left-handed pitchers that throw like a 80-mile-per-hour slider that goes like this across the strike zone. Um, Looking at some cons, pitchers who specialize versus lefties and righties, lefties or righties will need to adapt to get left behind. Speaking of that submarine lefty who throws 80-mile-per-hour sliders, he better hope that he can learn how to get right-handed batters out as well, or show that he can get right-handed batters out as well,
Mhm.
or the game of baseball will just kind of pass him by. And there is potential for pace of play to backfire, especially if a pitcher struggles versus the three hitters he faces and then immediately gets taken out. And then you have to get that next guy three hitters to face as well. I know this happened. I forget which game it was. It was a game in Atlanta. I forget who I was watching, but it was the Braves and somebody. And they called a guy in because it was a lefty pitcher. He was facing three straight lefties, and like all three lefties got on base in a row, and they had like doubles and home runs, and they couldn't. It was like late innings, so the Braves couldn't do anything because he has to face those three guys, a
Yeah.
home run and a double. So Joe Girardi, as I have him pictured here, he had some pretty not I won't say necessarily choice words about it, but he's definitely um, a vocal part of the cons to this. He says don't mess with the strategy
Mhm.
behind it. He was okay with a lot of some of the other rules that were put out there, but this one was kind of one of the ones that he wasn't quite so happy about.
Mhm. I think if you're trying to address pace of play, this rule does address that because there is a lot of dead time between when you have multiple pitching changes taking place in one inning. There is a lot of dead time there, and I know that's something that Manfred has been very vocal about. It's getting rid of the dead time, and so that's why I'm okay with this because if you force a pitcher to have to face three batters, one, it does kind of make them have to learn how to pitch to their weakness. But two, it also forces them to have to adapt. They're either it's exactly like you said, you either adapt or you get left behind. Um, if you're a lefty who's got a nasty sinker and can get lefties out, but can't get righties out because that sinker's too easy to read, he's got to learn to adapt somehow. I mean, he's a,
Hmm.
he's a pitcher. Pitchers, it's a pitcher's job to be able to get the batter out. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what the case is. It's just like a batter. For the
Yep.
batter, it's their job to be able to hit a pitcher, and if they can't hit a pitcher, if they can't hit, they're going to get left behind. They're got to learn to adapt to that.
Correct. All right, moving on to some pros and cons of the actor roster limit and the taxi squad that's going to be implemented. Um, Pros, obviously, with the one extra spot and the taxi squad, more players will get the chance to reach the majors. Those guys will get their chance to earn their pension, start that clock. Get some major league service time. Get their major league free agency clock kind of ticking. All bunch of good stuff for the players. We'll obviously also have faster games in September due to the fact that we're not rosters aren't going to be expanded to like 40 guys like they usually were, and so you saw bullpens of like 20, and so teams would just abuse it and they'd get all these fringe major leaguers a whole bunch of time there in mid to late September, and we'd have two teams not in the postseason, duking it out for 7 hours in a 9 inning game because they had 70 different bullpen calls. So obviously that's a plus. But looking at some cons, there will be less players who get a chance to debut and play meaningful games in September, simply because the rosters won't be nearly as big. And to talk about the taxi squads for a second, I do kind of agree to where you were at with you might as well just make it, at least for this year, due to COVID. It's always a worry, but I guess I guess where they're trying to get is like they want guys to be able to play in the major league team, but maybe they don't have them traveling together. Maybe they have these five guys as kind of a separate travel group. So, they have no contact with the team just in case, there's an outbreak of COVID within the team. And you've got multiple guys who get it. These guys are fresh. They haven't been a part, of the team at all. So they can just, change hotels, come over and get ready to play. But as you mentioned, it will affect, how they prepare. These guys are going to have to be almost super players, when it comes to preparation.
See, I never had a problem with the 40-man roster limit in September. I kind of liked it because it was cool to see guys who are potentially getting a chance the next season.
Hmm.
They're proving their value early on. So that's why I'm not really a big fan of the limit of just 28, because that's only two extra players compared to what you had on top of the taxi squad. So I don't know. I kind of liked having the rosters get expanded because it allowed fan bases to see potential players that could make an impact on the team. It allows teams to get a chance to see, one, who could be an impact on the team the next season, two, who might even make a postseason roster spot if that's the case, and three, gives a chance to maybe trade some of those guys for some immediate help if they're in a position where they feel like they can win. So I
Yeah.
don't know. This is kind of my spiel on that.
Yeah, and some guys earn jobs for the next season based on how
Hmm.
they did in September. Veterans, you get to see some veterans play on teams that normally you wouldn't. How veterans, will always kind of find a new home, especially once they're in their mid 30s. They will find a home, play the minor league season, and then get called up in September and
Right.
kind of ball out. So this is a very touchy subject, depending on who you talk to. This is the National League designated hitter. We now officially have stats that we can compare and contrast. All the stats were acquired from MLB.com. Shout out to those guys over there for supplying me with these wonderful charts that I was able to go through. So looking at the NL designated hitters, just to start it off, we had 15 NL hitters who had at least 50 at bats in 2020 as a DH. Overall in the National League, uh, hitters who were in the designated hitter spot in the lineup hit 109 home runs. That's in a 60 game season. It's almost two a game
Hmm.
per team. Um, Looking at NL pitchers from 2015 to 2019, all of the pitchers in the National League hit a combined 117 home runs. So, I mean, obviously you take the 30 games played, you times that by, or you times the 60 games played by each team, that's whatever number you come up with. That's 109 home runs in that many games. Um, but it was something like 24,000 games from 2015 to 2019, 117 home runs by NL pitchers. Um, NL hitters with at least 50 at bats in 2020 as a DH. 12 of those 15 had at least a 200 batting average or better. Those 12 hit at least 250. So eight of those 12, or eight of the 15 uh, hitters who had at least 50 at bats as a DH in 2020 had a respectable batting average of at least
Mm-hmm.
250 or higher. So that's over 50%. The DH was I would consider a success in a 60 game season. Looking at pitchers, among 140 pitchers who had at least 50 at bats from 2015 to 2019, only 21 of those 140, so 15% of pitchers with at least 50 at bats in the last 6 years had a 200 batting average or better. 15%. Four pitchers hit at least 250, and 41, so that's 30%, hit under 100. So, we're in a situation where 30% of pitchers who, had any sort of meaningful amount of at bats from the past 5 or 6 years, 30% of them hit under 100. Um, I know I just don't really get where people defend pitchers hitting. It's not really the goal for a manager is to get his pitcher out of the lineup as quickly as possible to get
Yeah.
a hitter in there.
Yeah.
Pitchers, if you look at at bats that pitchers have per game, it's gone way down from where it used to be. Pitchers used to get three, almost four at bats a game back in the 60s and 70s. Well, now they don't. Now bullpens are more prevalent. It's all about bridging the gap between the start of the game to your bullpen. So, most pitchers get, two at bats a game and that's it. So why not just have a DH in there? DH is going to, it's not just going to be some, 6'4", 250-pound dude with a big burly bush beard, spitting tobacco, hitting, 230 and hitting 75 home runs. These are, there were a lot of different hitters who played DH last season. A lot of guys who you wouldn't expect to play DH played DH last season. Matt Kemp was a DH last season. He's still at least a respectable outfielder, and he played DH all last year. So real quick before we jump to this next page, what were your thoughts on the National League DH? Looking at those numbers,
National League DH would add a would add jobs so much.
yeah,
It gives hitters a chance to
yep,
maybe make a team. It also allows players to have their careers prolonged because let's face it, there's some guys as they get older, they may be able to swing, like David Ortiz, for example. He got older and he could
yep,
swing the bat, but he couldn't field for the life of him. And it's
yep,
just because he was getting older, your body becomes more frail. There's just some things you can't do. But if you can still do some parts of the game, why not still play? And
yeah,
that's why I'm more okay with I would rather just have a universal DH because having a universal DH would add jobs for players.
yep,
It would allow guys to play longer. It allow guys to even maybe make the major leagues instead of being career minor leaguers. Um, but also I get the argument of pitchers should hit. It's just they're athletes. I get where the argument comes from of like they're athletes. They should be know how to hit, but it's not their job to know how to hit. It's not.
yeah,
And as a
yeah,
manager, I'd rather have 8 to 9 capable guys hitting in the lineup instead of having a throwaway spot in the lineup because I have to put my pitcher in there.
yep.
It's not worth it for me. That's not something that I don't really find value or luxury in that. And I think it's kind of pointless at that point to have to waste a lineup spot. But that's also why I'm like, I'd rather just have one or the other, either
Mm-hmm.
universal DH or all pitchers hit. Don't have these like weird rules with one or the other. It's just too confusing.
And my issue with that, I know that that's essentially the only real argument that these baseball purists have is pitcher's an athlete, he should hit. All right, then why is Mike Trout not a real athlete because he doesn't know how to pitch? Like that's how insane it is. Like
Yeah.
you're asking Max Scherzer, you're asking Jacob DeGrom, you're asking all these who you're going to be paying them $30 million a year, if not more, to pitch. You pay Mike Trout $30 million a year to hit. That would be like saying Mike Trout's not a real athlete, not a real baseball player, because he doesn't know how to pitch. Like that sounds insane.
Well, and here's the thing too: is there are some pitchers who can carry themselves with the bat. Don't get me
Sure,
wrong. There are
and
some guys who
use him
are,
as your DH.
yeah, there are some guys who
Mm-hmm.
can hit. And if a manager so much wants to put a pitcher in his lineup, if they can carry themselves with a
Yeah.
bat, why not? But you brought up a good point with how more than 70% of the pitchers since 2015 have a batting average below 200. And
Yeah.
that's, if a hitter had a batting average that bad, there's no way they'd be in the lineup. So
Yep.
why are you going to put a pitcher in there? Like, if you don't have to put the pitcher in there, why are you going to do that?
Yeah. The only strategy that comes out of a pitcher hitting, like the only strategy is they're so bad at hitting that the only competent thing they can do with the bat is lay down a bunt.
Exactly.
Like, and that's another argument that people like to make. Is like, oh well, pitchers bunt a lot. That's because they can't hit. It's because you're not going to see pitchers on the backfields in spring training, taking live BP, playing in simulated games as a hitter, because that's not their job. They're not hitters. If you can
Right.
hit and you can pitch, I mean, you look at, just to wrap this up, you look at the best pitchers who have been. You look at the pitchers who have been the best hitters. You look at probably Michael Lorenzen, uh, Madison Bumgarner, maybe Jacob DeGrom, maybe. Uh, None of those guys are good hitters. They're good hitters for pitchers,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't stick any one of those. Like if those three were just hitters, they would have never reached the major leagues.
Exactly.
Because they're just not good hitters. Yeah, and he can hit. Michael Lorenzen can hit a home run every now and then. I don't want Michael Lorenzen hitting on my team. Um, so with that over with, looking at some of these charts, as I mentioned, these are all thanks to 538. He put these beautiful charts together, not specifically for me. You can find these on the web. He put these together with information from Fangraphs. So I wanted a quick shout out. I know he's got some watermarks in there, but I wanted to go ahead and add something from myself to him, to them, to Fangraphs. Thank you guys. Makes our job a lot easier. So NL pitchers bat way less these days. Looking at plate appearances by pitchers in the NL per game since 1973. In 1973, it was at 2.8 per game. So that's ideally probably like the seventh inning, right around then. That's around the time that he would get taken out for a bullpen arm. Looking at it now, 1.98. It's dropped almost a full at bat less per game. So at this point now, you're looking like fifth inning, maybe fourth inning, depending on how you're doing and how the game looks to be playing out. Um, and looking at the fact that pitchers just straight up can't hit anymore. Looking at weighted runs created plus. So for our big stat geeks out there, for our big analytics guys, WRC plus for positions since 1901. I mean, you look at pitchers. You go back to the dead ball era, they were still the worst hitting position on the field. At no point in time has the pitcher come anywhere close to being a feasible hitter in a team's lineup. And since essentially since the DH in the American League got established, they've been firmly entrenched in the negatives in terms of WRC plus. Now it's all the way down to 25 in 2019. Uh, it's just there's a lot of stats that say pitchers just they can't hit. So why would you do it? This would be like asking your quarterback to go out there and punt or something like that. Like it just sounds crazy to keep asking a guy who specifically can't do a job well to keep doing it.
Yeah, they're supposed to go out there and throw innings and strike guys
Yeah.
out. They're not supposed to go out there and make a fool of themselves at the plate,
Mm-hmm.
And it is just one of those things. I think the league needs to they need to figure it out. Either have the universal DH or let all pitchers hit and give every team a disadvantage instead of letting half the league have an advantage of having an extra spot in the lineup, and then the other half of the league has to throw a pitcher out there as long as they're at home.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. It's a dying thing.
Yeah.
It's not the 1900s anymore when you had
Yeah.
Babe Ruth going out there and logging innings and hitting 500
Yeah.
foot bombs. That's just not how it
Yeah.
works anymore.
Yeah. And if if you can do it, Shohei Ohtani, he's proving that it's absolutely not easy. There's a lot of wear and tear on your body. So I certainly wouldn't ask, a starting pitcher to go out there and do that, every 5 days for a full season.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if I'm going to pay him a Brinks truck worth of cash every year.
Yeah.
All right. So we reached the end of another wonderful episode of Dugout Talk. This one was a little more opinionated than what most of ours have been, but that's always fine. I like these episodes where we're pretty much free to talk our minds about topics. So as always, you can find us on social media. You can find us on Instagram at Real Dugout Talk. You can find us on TikTok at Dugout Talk. I have my little microphone that I bought here on Amazon. I wanted to give you guys a quick look. It's nothing special, just a tiny little microphone that I can have. Just plop it on my shirt. It sounds, it's a big sound good. It's a big difference in how good it sounds.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be posting a lot more TikToks with that. You can find us on Twitter at Dugout Talk 1. You can always find us here on YouTube at Dugout Talk. You can find us on Facebook as well at Real Dugout Talk. And obviously, now that I've been posting some of our Orioles rebuilds, you can find me specifically at Victory 1832. That's on PSN. Feel free to shoot me a shoot me a friend request. I'm always looking to play some video games with you guys. I play shooters, I play sports games, racing games, action adventure games. I play it all. So feel free. If you got some free time on your hands, I have free time on my hands. Let's get together and play some games.
Yeah, sounds fun. But anyway, thank you guys for tuning in with us again today. We appreciate you supporting us and just being there on this ride. I believe tomorrow we're doing was it the 2015 Mets we agreed on?
I
Uh,
believe so.
yeah, for the 1 year wonder. Yeah, so we're going to be breaking down how the Mets made the World Series last year in 2015. That should be a good episode. So be sure to tune into that if you're a Mets fan or you know any Mets fans, or if you're just a baseball fan and you want to get some baseball going. Be sure to share this podcast with anyone you know who might be interested. And until then, we will see you guys tomorrow.
See you guys.